annoyingly successful, brilliantly handsome, fast behind the wheel of a race car, a movie star, a TV star,
Nice guy.
and a nice guy. Obviously, we all know him from Grey's Anatomy, and he's here to join us to really talk about the journey he's been on when he turned from McDreamy to McRacer. So he's a great friend of ours. Let's welcome Patrick Dempsey. And there he is, Patrick. Welcome to the Love of Cars, mate. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Now, clarification, because everyone's in the virtual world. Is this really you, or is this a digital representation of you?
I need to get a digital representation, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm here. This is me. This has been my life in this little area, communicating with people and Zoom meetings, things like that. It's all happening here. So life goes on in our little pods.
Yeah, and of course you made an appearance alongside a lot of legends of racing at the virtual Le Mans this weekend. How was that for you?
You know what? It was surprisingly entertaining and exciting. And you look at some of the pace of some of the pro drivers against the sim drivers, which was phenomenal. I thought the technology with the cars and the way they could move, you could see the input from the drivers. And the way the cars would respond is very similar to what you would feel over the curves at Le Mans. Yeah, like right now, you start to see the turning right here and the vibration. You can see the suspension working. It's great.
Yeah.
You know, I think it will get better in time, and we're living in a new era. That's for sure. I mean, that's a lot less expensive, certainly.
Yeah, especially when you do that and you nose it into the wall. Well, I mean.
But you're out, right? So your mistakes count, which is what's really good. So you can't be too aggressive. Maybe a little bit with the stewards they could get in and talk about. We had some issues on the 88 car when we got caught up with the safety car. But overall, you know what? For what we had, I was very entertained, very impressed. And to stay concentrated that way for 24 hours is impressive for the drivers.
I mean,
really impressive.
Really impressive.
If you said, said a year ago, we're going to have there's going to be no Le Mans, but we're going to have a full television studio in Paris covering the action of a digital race, you wouldn't have believed it. But the other part is, like, it's so hard to keep it on the track by yourself, to race at that level. Anyone who's spent time on a sim, to keep the car together, not make a mistake, not wreck for 24 hours. I mean, is mind-boggling.
And Patrick,
I mean, it's a real achievement on the mental aspect of racing, the level of concentration. I don't think people realize, who aren't necessarily in the sport, what it takes, especially at Le Mans. The nighttime racing is probably the most difficult. That's when the race happens, and you're dealing with traffic constantly. So you got that in the sim in your room and all this stuff. It was fun.
Allan McNish, you know, who won the race 3 times. He was our guest to kick off the show, and he was saying that he enjoyed a sight that I guess none of us have ever seen. Normally, you're wearing your helmet, and you might see a little fist pump, right, or something from inside the car. Now you're seeing Andre Lotterer, you know, wow, you know, you're seeing their concentration. Face. You've never seen drivers' faces like that. That was something special.
It's a good point. You see the humanity behind the wheel, which you don't necessarily get when you're watching. It's like this inanimate object. You don't realize someene's there. It's great. It's fun. Yeah. Good perspective.
Yeah, I think it was really good for spectating. But talking about spectating, let's go back a few years to, and I can't remember quite what year it was, but your first Le Mans. And do you remember, I was there in the pit lane, and I got to tell you that as I'd like to think as you're a friend, you're there. I've watched your racing in the States. We've sort of seen you evolve, and we were there to be there in the pit lane and see you, the nerves, this journey. You weren't Patrick Dempsey, the actor. You were a race car driver who was a rookie in front of the largest crowd with more attention on him than anyone else since Steve McQueen was there. Do you remember what that feeling was like? Because I remember when we went back into the garage, you needed a lot of alone time just to process it.
Yeah, once again, I mean, this is the event. That's the moment you dream about, right there, is crossing the finish line and having your car in first place or being on the podium. The first time I was there was in 2009. This is a dream of an endurance racer. Everybody, to have the opportunity to fulfill a dream by being there, to be able to compete, and then to be able to compete 4 times, to me was, each time it's so special.
Yeah,
it's a magical place. I remember the first time I went to see the race in person, which I think helped me mentally prepare for the race in '09, was just getting a sense of the celebration of it, the week-long ceremony. It's very much like Indianapolis or things like that. And it was a dream come true to me. I loved it. It was a magical experience. And all the work that took to get there, that was well into my racing at that point. We had all known each other for a very long time, and that was the goal, to get there. To be there for the first time was a great feeling, really fun. And one of the drivers was sick, so Joe Foster and I went back and forth all night long, and we finished the race. That's the greatest thing, the sense of satisfaction at that point, racing at that level, being around so many talented drivers, to be in that world and amongst them and to be able to compete was a life-changing moment for me, certainly.
Talk about, Justin touched on it. Talk about the pressure and the nerves, because the speed, racing is dangerous and intense, but Le Mans is just next level. The scale of it, the history. Talk about, have you ever felt more like pressure or nerves in your life?
No, that is the first time I got in the car at Le Mans during the race, with the amount of coverage that was on at that time in '09. Of course, we had all the major manufacturers competing in LMP1 category. It was really huge crowds, really quite something. And there was so many eyes and so much pressure that you have to work on the mental aspect of sport, right? It's like, how do you control your emotions? How do you maintain a calm? How do you keep private in a public situation? And that was the challenge for me. Once I was in the car, I was fine. It was just getting from the car to, the trailer. And then it was madness, total madness.
I have never seen.
It was a great experience.
It was, but I tell you, they went nuts in France.
It was like a scrum.
It was a scrum. Do you remember the parade? The parade. You couldn't. Patrick. It was like a cross between Mardi Gras and the Indy 500. It was outstanding. And in the middle of it, I did remember thinking to myself, how, for the rest of us, it's tough being there, and your first time getting used to pacing yourself. And I remember thinking to myself, he's going to be exhausted. He's going to be so exhausted before the green flag even goes.
I remember when the green flag went, you're like, oh my God, I just want to sleep.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. You're busy with meetings from first thing in the morning, and then you start to get into it. And
the week is exhausting.
You do enough of them, you start to, how to pace yourself. You start to learn how to go, okay, this is my downtime. And, Patrick Long, who is a co-driver, the next 3 times I went, was remarkable to watch, because he could fall asleep like that, and then get up and ready to go and in the car. And it's just like amazing to watch the truly professional race car drivers, how they handle the pressure and those moments was great. It was just a dream come true. And to have that experience, I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, I bet you are. Obviously, as an actor, and I just came to mind, I imagine that when you're there, knowing that you might not be directly racing at Le Mans with Tom Christensen, but you are against him. You could affect the outcome of his race. You are up against, these extraordinary talents whose literal livelihoods are depending, in their future careers on this race. Is there any feeling compatible with acting, like your first time you go on and you're with a major actor and you're a young actor and you've got to bring your game and you've got it, but they don't know you've got it? Is there any sort of similarities there?
Yes, I think a lot more starstruck in the drivers' meeting at Le Mans than any other time in my life, I have to say, because you're looking around and these are my heroes, right?
Yeah.
These are the people that the people that I just admire for their ability, and how quick and what they can get out of the car. So it was so surreal. I tried to remember every time I went to Le Mans, enjoy every moment of it. And that allowed me to pace myself through the whole week, because I never knew if I was ever going to get a chance to come back. Didn't know what the outcome of the race would be. And I wanted to enjoy all of it. And, it was an incredible thing. And it gets in your blood. And there's something magical about Le Mans. And I remember the first time I went there just as a fan, and I walked down the front straight, and it was something that was very moving to me. So to be able to do it after dreaming about it, after sitting on a couch, and then finally not watching Speed Vision anymore and participating is a remarkable journey. Really fortunate to be able to do it.
Now, wind
Real
it
well.
all the way back. This show is the love of cars, and we hear a lot of people, where their stories, their journeys began. McKeel Haggerty says it's how you had to spend time with Dad. If you want to spend time with Dad, it was in the garage. Now, it wasn't something you discovered, this love of cars and racing, late in life. I mean, this goes back to your childhood. Then you obviously had your career, which presented the opportunities. Wind all the way back to, I mean, just when the bug got you, and then your first exposure to racing. Could you ever envision Le Mans at that point? Take us through that kind of whole journey and as it unfolded.
Well, my dad was actually a team owner. My dad, he passed away when I was quite young, when I was about 18 years old. He used to run moonshine, and he used to run short track races back in the day. So he always loved racing. And every now and then I would hear stories about his days of racing and the bar and all that stuff at that era. We would always watch the 500, and we would always watch Monaco and some of the big races. And when we could find Le Mans, we'd watch it on TV. And every Friday night when he would come home as a kid, he would bring me a Matchbox. And that's where my love of cars began. And of course, the town in which we grew up in, I grew up in a small town in Maine called Turner, Maine. There was a route called Route 4 that drove by the house. And I could see in the summer all the vintage cars drive by. And I would sit on the hillside, and I would you knew certain times of day, on the weekends or Fridays, you'd see the cars parade by. And that's where you would see cars were like, I remember the first time I saw a Jag 120 in person, and I was blown away. This beautiful woman driving it, and it was going down the road, and I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. Breathtaking. And that's where it started, and of course, the love for racing was with the slot cars. That's when it started. And then always wanted to do it. And I never really started racing anything until I did Skip Barber, and then the Panos Racing School, where I met Joe Foster and all those guys. And a lot of drivers came out of that program. Don Panos did a crazy guy, crazy man, but remarkable how many people in that group that went through that school. And of course, Joe Foster was the head instructor at that time. And amazing period.
So total,
there it is.
literal realization of a lifelong dream to race at Le Mans. Stepped away from it. You're still a team owner. Where do you go from here? Are you content being a team owner? Going to do any more driving just for fun, competitive? Bring us up to speed on what the future looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. I had achieved all my goals. So it was a question of you have to sacrifice. You have to give up, and you have to commit 100% to race. To be competitive, you have to be racing every weekend, and it took a great toll on my family. It certainly had an impact on my career for a moment, but it was I had to do this. It was a moment. I was teed up. I was positioned to succeed. I had an opportunity in 2015 to race full-time as a professional driver, and I did it. I achieved my goals, had a great team to be with Porsche, to do a full season in the WEC, to be on the podium at Le Mans, to be on the top step in Japan. I achieved everything. It was hard for me to justify being away from my family at this time. So now, getting back in the car, I did a really good test with John Wright at Sebring in the spring. We were putting our program together to do some cup races and maybe do some stuff in Europe. Pace wasn't too bad. I needed to work on my conditioning, but it'd be fun to do the cup races. And then Super Cup for me is if I was a young man starting my career over, that's where I would go, without question.
Totally. So obviously, it was funny. We were just looking at those clips come up there, and I was thinking about what you were saying about Le Mans. You've met now and become part of the racing scene, but when you've met, you spent time with Brian Redman and Jochen Mass and Jackie Ickx and my father and these guys.
Sterling Moss. It's Sterling Moss.
And Sterling, yeah.
Crazy.
I mean, what as you say, it's equivalent of us suddenly being able to hang out with, all the best some of the top actors in the world, and it wasn't our natural habitat. You've become a part of this world. Do you look on that era of racing from the 70s into the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Is that a romantic period for you? Because we often get drawn into that, watching the 917s and then the 956 and 962s. It really created sports cars as we know it. Was that a part of the magic for you, part of the story?
Yes, it is. You certainly, for me, it was sort of the early 60s. You started to get those motor cars. You had the Lotus, right? And you had the Jim Clark car models all the time. You would see those colors that were growing up. the atmosphere in those days as a kid, I remember listening to the Indy 500 in my family station wagon because they played the telecast. And there's something about every generation. If you go back to the 30s and that group of drivers, and then you go into the Fangio era, which was an amazing era, the 50s and then the 60s, and then sort of we're coming alive in the 70s and watching the racing at that point, and the technology, the evolution of these cars is phenomenal. And the safety aspect, if you look at it, you look at the vintage shots of Le Mans without the chicanes, what that must have been like. And then here you have the old cars. I mean, look at the ride height on these cars.
I know.
Look how much movement there is.
And
Hey, look at that.
the barriers.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah. I mean, you used to be able to go. You only have to look at the photographs to know how close those guys could be. And you watch Le Mans, you could literally walk up against the hedge, just like this guy is here. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah,
it's phenomenal. I mean, if you walk to the backside, you know, to the mole zone on the straight, you get out there at nighttime and you get close. You can get close enough where the sound of those cars going so fast, it just goes through your body. It's an amazing thing. So to be there, wouldn't it be great to go back in time for that weekend and to see that era? So dangerous.
I would love to go. I would love.